Hey guys, but 25 here, watching launch of two Galileo satellites. You don't know what. Satellite number, it's like FOC. I Sat 9 or something. I don't know. Let's see.
Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue pour ce 8e lancement de l'année au Centre spatial guyanais. Et ce 2e lancement de l'année d'un Soyouz. Aujourd'hui, pour cette mission, au-dessus de l'équateur. Le
Switch to English.
seront lâchés en même temps.
Space Utopia.
Of the year to be performed by Arianespace for the European Union. In both cases, mission integration was made in the framework of a contract signed with the European Space Agency, responsible for Galileo and Copernicus space segments. Arianespace is thus very grateful to the European Commission and European Space Agency for their continuous trust in our launch systems. It is a source of great pride for us to provide European governments and institutions with independent access to space thanks to our launch vehicle family. But our 12th Soyuz to be launched from French Guiana is now being readied for liftoff, so enjoy the show.
Bonsoir, bienvenue, nous sommes en direct au CSG.
Going through the final preparations before launch, which is scheduled for just over 17 minutes time. You can see the countdown there on the top right hand side of your screen. So this is the mission control room. The teams here are all concentrating hard at this point before launch. Our program comes to you in both French and in English, and in the French commentary box we have Pierre Junier, and interpreting me is Thomas Bigot, and you can hear his voice there if you're listening in French. We are launching the Russian vehicle tonight, Soyuz, and there she is on the pad. It's her 12th launch from the Guyana Space Center. She's made of 4 sections. We call them stages. The first stage constitutes the boosters, 4 of them, and then the second stage followed by the third tank there, and on top of everything is the frigate upper stage, and encapsulating it all is the fairing. That's the nose of the launcher there at the top, and if we were to look inside we could see our 2 satellites attached there to the gold structure at the bottom. That's the frigate upper stage, our Galileo's FOC 9 and 10 FOC, manufactured there by OHB. 15 minutes and 48 seconds to launch. These are the status panels here on the right-hand side of the screen. They're all green. These are the systems which send their status to the boards here in Mission Control. A little bit like the dashboard in your car, or indeed a set of traffic lights. Everything has to be green in order for a launch to go ahead. We have various teams working here in Mission Control. This is an important team. It's called the Flight Desk. made up of the top management, the highest technical authority for launch operations. And they have the final say in the event of unplanned situations, and teams across the base report to them. And we have, of course, joint Russian and European teams working side by side. So Galileo is a thoroughly European project, indeed a flagship European project. And we'd like now to welcome the new Director General of the European Space Agency, Jan Werner.
Good evening, bonsoir und guten Abend. I'm very happy as the new Director General of ESA to be able to see together with you the launch of the two satellites of Galileo number 9 and 10. Galileo is a very important activity of the European Commission together with the European Space Agency, and it consists of course of the satellites, but at the same time also on the ground segment. And we are all hoping that the applications of Galileo will change also the European market. Galileo is a European activity, and therefore it's very important for industry, but also for the European citizens. But with today's launch, it's not the end of Galileo. There will be more launches of this series, and what we need at the same time, we need a development of the future. We need to explore new possibilities of navigational systems, and therefore we will also develop new satellites in the future. And ESA would like to play this role of a research and development also in the future together with the European Commission. I hope for a beautiful launch this evening.
So that was the new Director General of the European Space Agency, and I'm delighted that joining me here in the Mission Control Centre is the Director of Navigation, Didier Fèvre. Didier, thank you very much indeed for coming down to chat with us. Eventually you're going to have 30 satellites in the constellation. Today we're launching numbers 9 and 10, so we will have had a third, you'll be a third of the way there. What are these satellites going to mean for you?
Of course, 10 satellites is only 1/3 of the full constellation, but we have behind us the full development and the deployment of the first satellite. So we are very confident that the new ones will be operated with full success. And this is the first time now we are entering in a normal pace for production of satellites. And we are very confident now with the status of the production, status of the test, status of the operations here in Kourou. We have a very good team with OHB in Bremen, ESA in Estec, and CSG and INSpace here. So we are there.
And you're going also to be launching in December on board another Soyuz, 2 more satellites, which will mean that you will have launched 6 satellites in 9 months. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? Quite a production line.
Yes, it is. We launched in August, with difficulty, but we are now in September, meaning that we have launched already 6 satellites tonight in 1 year. If we launch in December, all our plans are leading to this launch in December. We'll have launched, as you say, 6 satellites in 9 months, which is exactly the pace we expect from our manufacturer and from here the operations, which means that the deployment is now ongoing, and the final deployment, which is expected by 2020, is, let's say, achievable.
So if you keep this rate of production going, you'll have launched 26 satellites by 2018.
Yes.
What's the next phase after that?
So let's start with the first phase. So 1 Soyuz in December, 1 Ariane in next year in 16, 1 Soyuz and 1 Ariane in 17, 1 Ariane in 18. And then we have to procure an additional batch of satellites, which will be launched by 19 and 20, reaching 30 satellites by 2020, as it is the objective of the European Commission of ESA to reach its final completion of the deployment by 2020.
Now, we're coming up to an important phase in the countdown, which is the last 10 minutes and 20 seconds. We're going to get an announcement. as you've been working here for many years in the launch campaign.
It's our 7th launch.
Absolutely.
In Soyuz.
Yeah, so it's a good relationship. Going back to, you mentioned earlier, satellites numbers 5 and 6, which were not launched onto their correct orbit. You have done a super rescue operation to get them back up and running. What's the latest on that? Can we use them?
Okay, the first thing to be done was to put the satellites injected in wrong orbit into a safe and stable situation. What we did just after the launch in 1 month, so in September, October, we were now in a safe, we were reaching a stable and safe situation. Then we used, thanks to the colleagues of CNES and ESOC, quite a complex strategy of recovery, putting satellites in a reasonable orbit from which we could do the tests for both for the platform and payload. And we did it in the last month of 14. And this allows us to say that satellites, the new series of satellites, because it was the first one built by OHB, are good for the deployment. What we decided in December. This was the reason why we launched in March. Now, what can we do with those satellites? And now we are quite confident that with change of the ground segment, which has just been decided, we will recover those satellites and putting them back in an operational status, not exactly the one of the others, but as seen from the users, we are now very confident that those satellites can be used as navigation satellites.
So that's excellent news, and I think a lot of people will be very pleased to hear that.
Yes, thank you.
Didier, thank you so much for coming to join us here on the stage, and I wish you all the very best, and your teams, for this launch. Thanks, Didier. The various parts of Soyuz are built in Russia and shipped here. Operations started in the Launch Vehicle Integration Building, the MIC, where the first 3 stages were assembled horizontally, starting with the 4 boosters, which were strapped to the 2nd stage, followed by integration of the 3rd stage. Meanwhile, the 2 Galileo satellites arrived in Cayenne and were then transported to the payload processing facility at the Guiana Space Center. Teams performed a series of tests and checked the good health of the satellites in the utmost cleanliness before transferring them to the S3B building to fill the tanks. The satellites were then attached to a dispenser, which is specially designed for enabling this dual launch. At the same time, the frigate upper stage was transferred from the F-Cube building to the S3B, where the satellite stack was integrated with the upper stage. The whole stack was carefully hoisted and encapsulated inside the protective case of the fairing to form what's known as the upper composite. The first 3 stages of the launch vehicle were transferred to the pad 4 days before launch. It was then raised to a vertical position inside the mobile gantry, which protects it and provides feed lines until it's retracted 1 hour before launch. The upper composite was then transported to the pad and mated with the 3rd stage that same day. The fluid and electrical connections were then activated along with the air conditioning inside the fairing. Meanwhile, less than 2 kilometers from the launch pad, the joint Russian and European teams in the Launch Control Center monitor all these operations. There are various teams here. One of them is responsible for ground operations, and it's led by the Soyuz launch site operations managers, who also coordinate with mission control for the final authorization to launch. And another team is responsible for making sure that the vehicle is ready for flight. This team's led by the Arianespace production managers, and they oversee all the operations from launch vehicle assembly to the moment of launch. The quality team oversee procedures to ensure that they are followed correctly. And the safeguarding team ensures that all the operations are carried out according to very strict rules, guaranteeing the utmost safety here at the base. And then we have the Immediate Visual Control Team, or CVI. These guys and girls monitor how the flight is progressing in real time, using telemetry information from the launcher as it flies over the tracking stations along the flight path. And right now, in the Launch Control Center, they are initiating the final phase in the Soyuz automated sequence. The computers are controlling all the final operations in these last 5 minutes and 9 seconds of the countdown. Well, I'm in the commentary box now, and joining me here for the rest of the programme is Edward Brewer from ESA. Welcome, Edward.
Hello, Katie.
Edward, you're the System AIV Manager for Galileo. What does that mean?
System AIV means integrating the main elements of the system, the space segment, that is the satellites, the ground segment and the user segment, to make sure that they work well together as a system and deliver the user performance that the user requires.
As people love figures, I will provide you some. So, in the night, at 2 hours, 8 minutes and 10 seconds, the liftoff will take place. 2 minutes after the liftoff, at 45 kilometers of altitude, the 4 boosters will be jettisoned. At 5 minutes after the liftoff, at 150 kilometers of altitude, the second stage will be separated. At 9 minutes after the liftoff, the third stage will inject the frigate upper stage and the payload into a suborbital orbit. Just after, the first burns of the frigate upper stage will take place during 40 minutes. Then, during 3 hours, a long ballistic phase will take place. At the end of this one, the second burns will take place during a few minutes, just in order to circularize the orbit and to put the payload into the separations orbit. At last, at 3 hours, 38 minutes after the liftoff, the simultaneous separation of the 2 spacecraft will occur.
Now, if you take a look there at the top right-hand side, you can see the big grey mast. It's just attaching there on the bottom of the fairing. That's called the KZM, and inside it are what we call the umbilical lines, taking information from the satellites to the teams on the ground. And those are about to be disconnected.
Largage des ombilicaux, ciao.
And the range operations manager there has announced that they're being disconnected. We can't actually see that. They're inside the mast, but they drop into a basket, and it means that we're no longer getting information from the spacecraft. So I have sent Edward to go and watch the launch in real life from the viewing station, and he will come back and tell us what he saw. And we are 1 minute and 49 seconds now to launch. Watch out for that KZM mast pulling away 20 seconds before launch, 27 seconds rather, and then you'll see another mast below it called the VKM will pull away after that. Quick word about the ignition sequence on Soyuz. We have a system for checking the health of the engines before it leaves the pad. First of all, we switch on the engines on the 4 boosters and the core stage 16 seconds before liftoff, but then we throttle them up gradually
12 de DDO, attention pour moins 1 minute.
to check the engines are working.
Top, H0 moins 1 minute.
Best wishes to all the teams for the launch, and also to the industrial consortium led by OHB, and to everyone in the ground stations. Good luck.
Largage du KZM. À 12 de DDO, attention pour le début de la séquence d'allumage lanceur. Top, H0 moins 20 secondes. Largage du VKM. Allumage triétage à 12 de DDO. Attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Top. Et décollage VS12. paramètres du système de commande du lanceur sont nominaux. La stabilisation du pont lanceur est correcte.
And there she goes, the 12th Soyuz to lift off from this pad here. The Guyana Space Center lighting up the night sky. Hauling itself against the gravity of our planet. Delivering a total thrust, the equivalent of 3 Airbus 380s. Pretty impressive. Powerful stuff.
Le vol est nominal. Les paramètres de structure du lanceur sont nominaux.
He's telling us that everything's normal and going according to plan. Right now the boosters are doing all the work. They give us a short boost to get us away from Earth. They're delivering 80% of that thrust right now. Look at the bottom of the screen. He's saying everything's going as expected. Down at the bottom, the altitude on the bottom left is 38 kilometers above the Earth. The distance is the distance from the pad, if you were to draw a line. And we can see those boosters falling away there. You might have just noticed 4 dots. And there we get some images from a previous launch when we had cameras on top of the launch vehicle on Soyuz. See how those boosters twist and turn as they fall back to Earth. It's all part of the plan. So we're now burning the main... he says that everything's correct after the separation. So we're burning the main core stage. It's called the Block A in the business, and that burns for just under 5 minutes. A word about the confirmations that we're getting from Joël Egalji. You can see him there on the right-hand side of the screen. We get the actual confirmations slightly after the milestones occurred, sometimes because information has to go via Moscow. So we see the key moments as they're scheduled to happen, and it sometimes takes a little bit of time for that information to get to us. So, Edward's just come back into the commentary box. So how did that feel, watching your satellites?
It was incredible, Katie. I have the adrenaline up to my head. It was a beautiful view. The sky was completely clear, and I could even see the separation of the boosters happening above us. It was, I've been working on this program now since 13 years, and to see this way beautifully the rocket going up is an amazing experience.
And now we are losing the fairing, which we don't need anymore because we are out of the dense part of the atmosphere, so there's no friction. And we can see your satellites for the first time. What are we looking at?
Indeed, the golden structure you see is the frigate upper stage, which later on will deliver the satellites from the lower berth in which the Soyuz will bring it to the higher orbit. You see also very well now the satellites with the where you see the black circle in the middle is the navigation antenna. The antenna above that is the search and rescue antenna, and on the side you see very well the solar arrays, which of course now are folded up, and later on we'll need to deploy.
And they will open up just like a butterfly.
Indeed.
Coming out of its cocoon.
And in the middle you see the dispenser to which the satellites are attached to.
And here we have the scheduled moment when we ignite the third stage and separate the second stage. And there you see the lattice work structure that attaches those, or is between those two stages being jettisoned. So this is your 7th launch on board Soyuz for the Galileo constellation, and this was the launch 5.5 minutes ago. Lifting off from the pad here on the edge of the Amazon rainforest and the Guyana Space Center.
Acquisition de la télémesure par la station navale.
He's announcing that we have now received the signal at the SNA tracking station, the naval boat. We have a new facility here at the Guyana Space Center. It's called the Frigate Fueling Facility, or F-Cube. This mission's the first time we've used it.
We launched from French Guiana the first Soyuz in 2011 and the first Vega in 2012. Then we started the exploitation of the 3 launch vehicles, Ariane, Soyuz and Vega. Our launch rate capacity increased from 7 launches a year to 12 launches per year. We had the last point to solve, which was the capacity of filling operation, as Soyuz upper stage, frigate, was filled with propellant in S3 build, facility nominally dedicated to the spacecraft. Situated on Soyuz launch pad, this facility is dedicated to frigate, increasing disponibility of the filling facilities for spacecraft.
Flight VS-12 will be highlighted. This is the first time we are using the FQ building here behind me. It is dedicated exclusively to fill the frigate upper stage tanks. Frigate is sectioned at the top of the launcher, where we put the payload and we deliver them. This building represents a major advance both for the Soyuz launcher and for the campaigns at the Guyana Space Center. Before, we had to assemble the frigate filling installations for each campaign, then dismantle them afterwards. Now the facilities are permanently assembled inside the F-Cube. This saves time, as we no longer have assemble and dismantle operations. It's also more reliable. The other step forward is in better organized campaign at the base. Frigate is no longer fueled in the S3B building, so EPCU is now available for longer for filling the satellites. We have obtained more flexibility for payload preparation, and we have more productivity, giving place for the requirements of this year's order book.
This facility was built in only 17 months and was qualified in 1 month. Planning and budget were strictly respected, showing the professionalism of all companies involved, mostly from French Guiana.
Well now, our flight path took us out from Kourou across the Atlantic. We are heading out now across the Atlantic towards France. Now we travel across Europe, Russia, down over Southeast Asia towards Australia, which is where we will start the process of separating our satellites. Now we're tracking the launcher using ground stations as she flies over. It's called telemetry, and Soyuz sends signals which tell us how the flight is progressing. We have a number of different stations, tracking stations tonight, don't we?
Indeed, the first one is actually here in Kourou. Then the next one is a boat in the Atlantic Ocean, so a boat.
We had the signal earlier.
And now the next one is the tracking one is in Aussagrel near Toulouse in France. When the launcher is out of view of Aussagrel, we lose visibility for a while until we reach Australia, and then Perth in Australia will pick up the launcher for the last time.
And here we can see some super images. We've separating the third stage here, and really entering. And we have the confirmation there that we have switched off the engine and separated the third stage, and we're really entering the next phase of the journey now, because this is where frigate, our upper stage, takes the wheel. It's that gold structure which you could see back there. We'll see it again in a second. Right now it's getting ready to switch its engine on. It's called the pre-burn phase. It's going to push the fluids back into the tanks, giving a burst of acceleration to make sure there's enough propellant. Right now, we're looking on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see them there, our computer-generated images, CGI. Edward, they're showing us what the experts have calculated is actually happening to the launcher and the satellites, isn't it?
Yes, the images are based on the planned schedule of events. The actual events are being measured by the ground stations, but they are first sent to Moscow, and then they come back here in Kourou, where they can be confirmed. So there is some delay.
And we've switched on the engine now. Frigate is burning its engine for the first of 2 burns. Its job's to deliver our satellites to their drop-off point in space. And we have 3 bodies involved in the ESA program, Edward.
Yes, the European Commission is managing the overall program. ESA is the system architect, and then there's the body called the GSA. It's an agency that will deliver the services.
And the European Commission.
Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago, I confirmed the commitment of the Commission to make the satellite navigation program Galileo a tangible reality. Today, I am pleased to announce that the second launch of Galileo satellites in 2015 has just been performed. 1/3 of the Galileo constellation is now in space. This is an important milestone on the way leading to a fully deployed constellation of satellites and services by 2020. I am proud to say that this has been achieved thanks to the fruitful combination of a clear European political commitment with Europe's state-of-the-art technology and engineering expertise. I want to thank here all who contributed to this success, notably the project teams of our space industry, of the European Space Agency, of the French National Space Agency in Kourou, and of my Directorate General at the European Commission. Thank you for your attention.
Now we can see that we're picking up the signal at the next tracking station that Edward told us about, the Santa Maria tracking station in the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic. It's also known as Montes das Flores, which is Hill of Flowers in Portuguese. The Galileo program, Edward, it started over 10 years ago. What's happened over that time?
A lot. We launched first in 2005 and 2008 from Baikonur in Kazakhstan, the 2 Jove experimental satellites. Then we had in 2011 and 2012 we had the launches of the IOV satellites, the in-orbit validation satellites, and then these satellites were used to demonstrate that the system works, and now we're in the FOC, the final full operational capability satellites.
Satellites will be launched into orbit on top of a Soyuz launcher. It will never be a routine operation, but the mass production and frequent launches of Galileo satellites prove what a well-oiled machine the program has become. With now so many satellites in orbit, the system has the capacity to really show what it can provide. Already validated with a mini constellation of 4 satellites, Galileo showed it was performing beyond expectations. But now, with several years of operations and more satellites in orbit, the return of experience is still very good.
We have a good return of experience of the ground and space segment elements we have deployed so far. So we are very confident for the future. We have to carry on deploying the remaining elements of satellites and ground elements. And we are confident in order to reach for next year a capability which will allow actually the program to start providing the first services.
With first services soon to be operational, it's important to note that the complexness of Galileo does not lie within the individual satellites, but rather in the vastness of the system and its synchronization. Galileo is indeed comprised of a constellation of satellites associated with a huge ground segment, a network of stations deployed around the Earth and designed to manage the satellites and to check the positioning signals. With so many stations worldwide, this network is surely one of the most sophisticated systems ever built by Europe. However, as in space, operations on the ground are now becoming mature.
The ground segment of Galileo is deployed worldwide. We have 2 main control centers in Europe and a network of ground stations deployed all over the world. The ground segment is fairly complete. We are currently deploying the main elements of redundancy mainly in the control centers, in order to have full backup capability and to achieve the robustness which is necessary for the operations.
Now, with the ground segment almost completed and the constellation partly built, the challenge for Europe is to continue the deployment and keep on launching more and more satellites like Galileo Sat 9 and 10. Europe will also have to show that the system can deliver the services expected in 2016, with half of the satellites up and running.
The challenge for Galileo in the next months is not anymore in achieving the technical performance, but is in achieving all what is necessary to operate a very large distributed system in space and on ground, consisting of many elements which are largely unmanned, and they have to be controlled from the control centers, and to be able to automatize all the operations and to be able to achieve the robustness and the stability of the system that will be expected by the users.
The Galileo system will reach its full operational capability when there are no less than 24 satellites and 6 as backup, circulating Earth in 3 orbits at an altitude of 23,222 kilometers. By then, Europe will have its very own satellite navigation system, and it will provide high-quality positioning, navigation and timing services to users across the world. An ambitious goal, but one that Europe is ready for.
So Katie, as Javier Benedicto, our project manager, has explained, in 2013 in the in-orbit validation phase them worked. And now the emphasis is really on making sure that the system is stable and is able to maintain operations stable in order for it to allow to enter servers and to be used by the user community, because of course we all would like in the end to be able to use Galileo on our mobile phones and navigation devices.
Absolutely, and it's incredible when you think that only 10 years ago, when this was first conceived, the idea of us having navigation on our mobile phones was well, very novel, to say the least. The organisation which will implement the services for Galileo is called GSA. They've developed some new receivers.
Safer transport, efficient agriculture, cleaner shipping, more reliable surveying, and new innovative applications that help citizens in their daily lives. Galileo will have the power to do it all. But linking Galileo to user needs requires an all-important cornerstone: the receiver. Receivers act as a prism, translating navigation signals sent by satellites into a wide array of positioning and timing services. Many of the leading industry players already have commercial products that are ready to use Galileo. Today, almost 40% of receiver models on the market are Galileo-enabled, and more than 60% of available receivers integrate EGNOS. Since 2009, the European GNSS agency has been working closely with chipset and receiver manufacturers to ensure Galileo will be used to its full potential. This work includes technical workshops, sharing of Galileo updates, co-marketing and management of dedicated funding for receiver development.
The receiver is the key enabler for which all the signals are translated in services.
As support to Galileo receiver development, the GSA has been coordinating a comprehensive testing program in cooperation with 2 testing centres, the Joint Research Centre and the European Space Agency.
There's always a little bit of room for interpretation if you get an interface specification for a new system. By testing early, we were able to resolve a few ambiguities, ask questions, and make sure that everything works once the system is fully deployed.
These tests were conducted by the Joint Research Centre for Professional Receivers and the European Space Agency for Mass Market Receivers.
We are testing them as this full set of receivers, all under the very same conditions, testing all the Galileo bands, testing the coexistence with GNSS systems like GPS, and also testing what is the impact of certain type of unwanted emissions or signals like interference. No?
What is very good about this campaign is that we have been in very, very close contact with the manufacturers. We've spoken to the very people that develop the firmware for the receiver. Most of them kept in touch. They want to be kept in the loop. It's a campaign that is anticipating the future and preparing all of us to a better navigation experience.
We want to gain a better understanding of how the Galileo signals are used. Also, we want to understand whether there is enough information on the system so that the features of Galileo can be exploited to the maximum extent.
In the last year, we have performed many tests, like 460 hours of tests in the laboratory with 9 receivers and 91 hours of live tests in the field.
A broad range of tests verified how different receiver models use the Galileo signals so that manufacturers can update their technology and get the most out of Galileo's increased accuracy and reliability.
We of course participated in this joint test campaign that I want to say was very successful. Making the results of the tests available to our customers will also help adoption of Galileo.
GSA in the last few years have been investing more and more in an open dialogue with chipset and receiver manufacturer.
By paving the way for Galileo to be fully integrated into new generation receivers, we can ensure that Galileo signals enable a wide array of new applications and services.
So, Katie, this activity that is currently being conducted at the Joint Research Center in Italy and at ESTEC in the Netherlands to demonstrate that Galileo can work well with the main chipsets that are in the mobile phones today is fundamental for the rapid introduction of Galileo to use. And so it's a very important activity. Yeah.
And it means that we're going to be able to use it on our mobile phones.
Because that is the ultimate objective.
So let's come back to the flight. We are 500 kilometres of the Earth. We are 8,500 kilometres from the launch pad along the ground. And we're flying at a speed of 9.36 kilometres per second. Kilometres per second. On Galileo.
Although from a distance the Galileo constellation may look like a molecule with electron satellites and the Earth as its core, this atomic comparison only really comes into its own when one considers what lies at the heart of Galileo, the measurement of time. In fact, the Galileo system is one vast space clock, the accuracy of which is crucial to the quality of position calculations, and to ensure the success of this, Europe has developed what are known as atomic clocks. An atomic clock that deviates by 1 nanosecond produces an error on the ground of 30 centimeters, which, if translated to a second, makes an error of 300,000 kilometers, which means one might as well be on the moon. Hence the importance of reducing inaccuracy and the key role played by the clocks on board the Galileo satellites. The Galileo satellites are equipped with the best clock ever launched into space, known as the passive hydrogen maser. Maser stands for microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. From the outside, the clock just looks like a large cylindrical case, but inside atoms are dancing. Dancing a waltz with such regularity that it's in fact the source of this extreme precision.
The functioning of the atomic clock is linked to the behavior and the movement of hydrogen as it follows a predetermined course. Hydrogen molecules are channeled into a space where the molecules are split into two atoms that can be in two quantum states. States that can be differentiated by their colors, red and yellow. These atoms then pass down a long tunnel where they're sorted before continuing towards a huge cavity where they move in every direction. This is where the atoms are stimulated, excited, causing them to pass from one state to another, thus leading to the stimulated emission of microwave photons. Here they're orange. The frequency of this emission is absolutely stable and reproducible, and it is this accuracy and regularity that produces the atomic rhythm, essential to the services offered by the Galileo system. These impulses are then transformed into signals which are sent to Earth with a metronomic rhythm. All the satellites that make up the Galileo constellation will be equipped with these clocks, whose unchanging rhythm will enable ground receivers to calculate with extreme accuracy user positions, time and speeds, data that is essential for a whole range of applications.
So, Katie, these atomic clocks are really the heart of the system. They are the key enabler of the system, and they are based on on development activities that were started at ESA ESTEC in combination with European industry in the 1990s. And thanks to this, we are now today able to deploy a constellation with atomic clocks with excellent performance.
Remarkable technology, and incredible really to think how dependent now we all are on such accurate and precise timing. And if you look at the right-hand side of the screen at the top there, you can see we are really climbing into space. Just to remind everybody, the frigate upper stage is the gold structure there. And we're now going to hear from the prime contractor, OHB, who are leading the industrial consortium.
Right now, the next two satellites, Alba and Oriana, are on the way to their target orbits to increase the Galileo FOC constellation. OHB is prime for the FOC phase under ESA contract and responsible for 22 satellites for the time being. The modular and flexible design allows a cadence of one pair every 3 months and a maximum of flexibility in AIT with quality standards according to ESA rules. The first two FOC satellites were launched in August last year, followed by Adam and Anastasia in March 2015. By now, all satellites have an excellent in-orbit performance. OHB is proud of contributing to the European Satellite Navigation System, which will produce a multitude of useful applications. In parallel to the successful delivery of our FOC fleet, OHB is already actively working on the development of the next generation of navigation satellites for Europe. Find out more about OHB as a leading space systems company in Europe on ohb.de. Galileo FOC, satellites by OHB.
As well as the industrial teams in the whole consortium can feel very proud of themselves, I think, for building such super satellites. Edward, we are in the barbecue phase, we call it. We are actually rotating as if on a spit.
Indeed, and this is intended to ensure homogeneity of the thermal conditions around the satellites. The objective is to keep the temperature even across the satellites, because of course on the one side there's the sun, and on the other side there is the cold space.
So you're either very, very hot or very, very cold when you're in space. Not a very nice place to be, quite a hostile environment, and it's all been very carefully planned to keep things nice and even. So we crossed the Atlantic, we headed out over Northern Europe and Russia, and we are heading down over Southeast Asia towards Australia. What happens when we get there?
Then when we get close to Australia, we'll check in with the tracking station in Perth. So as I said, it will take about 3 hours to get there.
And we'll take a break in our program shortly, and we'll be coming back to you as we get ready, as Frigate gets ready to switch its engine back on. And just to recap, we are now 31.5 minutes into the flight. We are flying above the Earth at 1,800 kilometers above the Earth. We lifted off from the pad 31 minutes ago. It was a perfect launch, and we were very lucky because it was a beautiful night sky, clear with no clouds. So we had a super view of the launcher as it flew overhead. We're now in a coasting phase. The upper stage will switch its engine on in just over 3 hours' time. We are going to take a break, and we're going to come back to you just before Frigate switches on its engine. We'll see you shortly. Hello again, and welcome back. You join us live at the Guyana Space Centre, and we are orbiting Europe's 9th and 10th satellites in the Galileo navigation constellation. We are 3 hours and 34 minutes into the flight, coming up to 35 minutes into the flight. We're shortly going to start the process of releasing our satellites onto their orbit. I'm Katie Haswell, and joining me is Edward Brewer from ESA. Edward is a navigation expert and also works on the Galileo program. Edward, just for anyone who's just joining us, where are we in the flight? What's been happening so far?
So good morning. Currently the frigate upper stage is in the so-called the ballistic phase, which is a phase where the frigate is coasting without engine.
And we're going to take a little look back at the launch, which was 3 hours and 35 minutes ago. We lifted off from the pad at 2:08 in the morning Universal Time on board the Russian launcher Soyuz. You watched it, Edward. You went out onto the viewing deck and saw it with your own eyes.
And indeed, it was a very impressive sight. As I said before, I've been working on this program now for the last 13 years, and it was a very emotional moment to see for the first time the satellites being launched, and it was a beautiful sight. The sky was completely clear, and I saw it coming overhead.
And it is amazing how it lights up the night sky. The boosters fell away about 2 minutes roughly into the launch, followed by the fairing, that's the nose of the vehicle, to reveal the two satellites. There you can see them. The second and third stages burned for nearly 10 minutes. And then after that, the frigate upper stage, can you see it there, the gold structure? Switched its engine on, and that was the first burn, which lasted for 13 minutes. There you can see it switching on. Then it closed its engine down, and as you were saying, Edward, it's been coasting now for 3 hours and 15 minutes, the ballistic phase. During that time, we've been rotating as if on a spit, the barbecue phase.
Indeed.
So we're tracking this phase using telemetry, using the ground station in Perth in Australia. But what about for the satellites?
So currently, after the The satellites will have been released from the frigate upper stage. We have 3 stations that can receive the signals. The nominal stations are in Dongarra in Australia and the Kerguelen in the Indian Ocean. And then we have a backup station in Hartebeeshoek in South Africa. So currently we are waiting for a confirmation of that the transmitter on board of the satellites will have been switched on and that they're in good health.
So we have here the scheduled second frigate ignition. Frigate is in the process of switching its engine back on again. And just to remind you, it takes us sometimes a little bit of time to get the information and the confirmations of the various milestones during this flight, because the information has to go via Moscow, because of course Soyuz is a Russian vehicle, and our range operations manager there is Joel Egalji. You can see him on the right hand side of your screen, and he's the one who calls out all the confirmations as they happen and when he gets the information. Just talk us through the bottom of the screen. What are we looking at here?
So currently the frigate upper stage is at 23,555 kilometers. So this is basically the altitude in which the satellites will be released. So it's getting ready to
start the process of releasing the satellites.
Yeah.
And just to talk folk through, anyone who hasn't joined us before, the distance is the distance from the pad if you were drawing a line along the ground, and then you can see our speed over here on the right hand side of the screen. Right now we're travelling at 1.69 kilometers per second, and on the top right is the trajectory. It's the path that the vehicle is taking. It's been climbing very high into space.
Confirmation du deuxième allumage de l'étage frégate.
And our range operations manager has just confirmed that we have ignited our engine. Why did we switch it on now?
Because, as I said before, with the frigate upper stage has reached its target altitude of 23,558 kilometers. So now the frigate will position itself such that the satellites can be released.
And
that can be released.
And it always amazes me because, of course, everything looks like it's happening terribly slowly, but of course it's not. It's happening incredibly quickly up there in space. So frigate.
Propulsifs sont conformes à l'attendu.
He's saying the propulsion is going according to plan. The gold structure is the frigate upper stage, and it's a very clever piece of kit. Because it's an orbital vehicle in its own right, and it was originally designed by the Russians as an interplanetary probe, and it was adapted to fly on Soyuz.
So indeed it is a very clever spacecraft. It has the capability to switch on and off its engine for up to 20 times. So for this flight, of course, it's only done twice. But for launching constellations such as for Galileo, it's an ideal spacecraft.
And of course, it's excuse me, gives us an awful lot of flexibility because it means that frigate can take its passengers pretty well anywhere they need to go. You can see our flight path there. We took off from the launch base in Galileo, well, in Kourou. Galileo was the tracking station that tracked us. Then we picked up the signal in the middle of the sea on a boat. Then in the Azores at the tracking station in Santa Maria. We flew out across Europe and Southeast Asia, now over Australia.
So it's also impressive that over
Les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
Everything's normal, he says.
That in just over 3 hours, the frigate has travelled 23,000 kilometers. From the frigate has been released at 200 kilometers by Soyuz, and now it's at 23,000 kilometers. So it's quite impressive.
Incredible, isn't it? In 3 hours, climbing high into space. So we're coming up to the point where frigate will switch its engine off. And there we are at the scheduled cut-off time here.
La séquence d'allumage est conforme à l'attendu.
So we're going into the next scheduled ballistic phase. Of course, ballistic means that we're travelling without the engine. We're going into the phase that a lot of people call the space ballet. Not only does the frigate have the ability to switch its engine on and off, it also twists and turns to orientate the satellites. We have to put our satellites onto a very, very carefully planned set of maneuvers to orientate them correctly for their own journey, so that they can set off on the right path. How does this work? What are what we call the orbital requirements for your satellites, Edward?
So the altitude in which the satellites will
I believe we had a confirmation there of the extinction of the frigate upper stage. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So the desired altitude is 23,222 for the satellites, so they're slightly higher. And that, so basically the satellites are being released in the so-called graveyard orbit. That's for safety reasons in case something goes wrong. So now the orientation of the frigate is changing in order for the satellites to be released in opposite directions. So this is done by there are springs on the dispenser that will push the two satellites in opposite directions, such that they're away from the frigate, and that they can each of them safely go into the expected orbit.
So let's just go back to this graveyard orbit, because the the word graveyard sounds a bit dismal, but actually it's all part of the plan, and it's all done very specially to make sure everything's safe. So the graveyard orbit is actually a higher orbit than you need your satellites to be on. So you're going to put them, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to put them in a slightly higher orbit initially, and then you bring them down to a fractionally lower orbit where they spend their lifetime, and then when they come to the end of their life, you move them back up again to the so-called graveyard orbit. Is that correct? That
is correct. Furthermore, each plane has 8 satellites. So as soon as they are released, they will start their drifting. First of all, to a lower orbit, because now they're too high, and secondly to the location in the plane where they need to be for their operations.
Everyone's concentrating hard in the mission control room there, and of course we're going to be handing over to the teams on the ground once we separate the satellites.
Hello.
So we're just waiting now for the process to continue. We are 3 hours and 47 minutes into the flight, travelling here at an altitude of 23,560 kilometres. Our distance from the pad, 15,261 kilometres. And our speed, picked up speed, we are now flying at 2.65 kilometres per second. Earlier we were flying at 9 kilometres per second. And this is the scheduled moment for separation of the satellites. This is the time the satellites have been planned and scheduled to separate. We have 2 satellites attached to a dispenser, and we can see the dispenser there.
Confirmation de la séparation des satellites Galileo Foc FM5 et FM6.
And we have confirmation there from our range operations manager that the 2 satellites have been separated. And there Didier Fèvre, who we were talking with earlier, and Javier Benedicto.